You have tried to understand them. You have tried to forgive. You have tried to move on. And yet, something in your life keeps pulling you back to people who are not even present anymore. Maybe they are far away. Maybe they are unavailable. Maybe they are gone. Or maybe they are alive, but emotionally unreachable. And a quiet question keeps returning inside you. How can I heal something that involves people who are not here? This question is not weakness. It is not immaturity. It is not dependence. It is the voice of someone who senses deeply that healing does not happen only between individuals. It happens in systems. Bert Hellinger showed something that, at first, sounds confronting. Your family system does not live outside of you. It lives in you.
The image you carry of your parents, of your grandparents, of what happened and what was never spoken, all of this is alive inside your nervous system, your body, your relationships, your choices. This is why physical absence does not equal emotional freedom. You can move to another country and still feel bound. You can stop talking and still feel loyal. You can build a new life and still repeat old patterns. Because systems do not require physical proximity to operate. They require belonging. And belonging does not end when contact ends. Many people wait unconsciously for their family to change before allowing themselves to heal. They think, if my mother understood, if my father apologized, if they were here, if they were different. But systemic healing does not wait for permission. It begins the moment you change your inner position.
Hellinger observed that the deepest shifts happen not when others act, but when one person steps into a different stance toward the system. This is why it is possible to heal your family system even if no one else is present. Not by fixing them, not by cutting them off, but by repositioning yourself internally. This is where many people get confused. They believe healing requires confrontation, conversation, or closure. Sometimes it does. Often it does not. In many systems, direct contact would only create more entanglement. Healing in those cases happens quietly, inside. One of the first truths of family constellations is this: you are not in a relationship with your family as they are now. You are in relationship with the image of them that lives inside you. That image was formed early, before logic, before choice, and it continues to influence you until it is seen. You may notice this influence in patterns that feel irrational.
Choosing partners who resemble a parent you swore you would never be with. Feeling guilt when you succeed. Feeling stuck when you try to move forward. Feeling responsible for emotions that are not yours. These are not random behaviors. They are systemic movements, and they can be shifted without anyone else being present. Healing does not require agreement. It requires recognition of what is. Many people believe they cannot heal because their parents are unavailable, defensive, or absent. But Hellinger saw repeatedly that healing fails more often when people try to change others than when they turn inward. Because systems respond to order, not persuasion. Order is restored when each person stands in their rightful place. This place is internal before it is relational. If you are standing above your parents, judging, correcting, carrying, the system remains disturbed.
If you are standing below them, idealizing, excusing, waiting, the system also remains disturbed. Healing begins when you stand as the child, not small in value, small in position.
Small in the sense that life came to you through them. This is true regardless of how they behaved. This is where resistance often appears, because standing as the child feels like giving something up. It feels like losing moral ground. But systemic order is not moral, it is structural. Structure brings peace. You do not heal your family system by agreeing with what happened. You heal it by acknowledging where life came from. Life only flows forward when it is taken from its source. Rejecting the source interrupts the flow. And interrupted flow shows up as exhaustion, conflict, or stagnation. This is why healing does not require your family's presence, because the real work is not negotiation, it is alignment. Alignment with reality as it was,
not as it should have been. Many people confuse healing with emotional resolution. They think healing means feeling good about the past. In systemic work, healing means being at peace with the fact that the past happened. Peace is not comfort, it is agreement with reality. This agreement releases enormous energy. Another misunderstanding is the belief that you must remember everything to heal. You don't. The system remembers for you. Your body remembers. Your reactions remember. Your choices remember. Healing does not require memory. It requires position. Position answers the question, where am I standing in relation to those who came before me? If you are standing in opposition, the system pulls you back. If you are standing in loyalty through suffering, the system holds you down. If you are standing in your place, the system supports you. This support does not come from people. It comes from order.
Order is invisible, but its effects are tangible. Another key insight from Hellinger is that love alone does not heal systems. Love without order creates entanglement. Many people love their family deeply and suffer greatly because of it. They carry burdens that were never theirs. They repeat pain to remain loyal. They fail to surpass what their parents could not. This is love without order. Healing requires ordered love. Ordered love says, I respect what is yours and I keep what is mine. This separation does not require dialogue. It requires inner clarity. Inner clarity is established through simple, honest inner movements, not affirmations, not visualization, recognition. For example, recognizing that your parents had a life before you. They were shaped by forces you may never fully understand. When you stop demanding that they be different for you to be okay, something releases. This does not absolve them. It liberates you. Many people stay bound to their family system because they are still waiting for understanding, waiting for remorse, waiting for validation. Waiting keeps you oriented backward. Healing turns you forward. This forward movement begins when you stop trying to resolve the past with the people who belong to it. Instead, you resolve your relationship to the past inside yourself. This is why healing can happen alone. Not because others don't matter, but because your position matters more. Another important aspect is inclusion. Family systems suffer when someone is excluded. Excluded members do not disappear. They return through symptoms, repetitions, or later generations. You may carry sadness, anger, or fear that does not match your personal story. This often belongs to someone who is not given a place. Healing here does not require family discussion. It requires acknowledgement.
Acknowledging internally that those who were forgotten belong. Belonging restores balance. Balance calms the system. Another reason healing does not require presence is that systems respond to truth, not interaction. Truth is what happened.
Truth does not change when people deny it. When you acknowledge truth internally, the system registers it. This is why people often experience shifts without external change. Relationships soften. Symptoms ease. Choices become clearer. Not because others changed, but because the system reorganized. Before we go deeper, if this way of seeing family healing is opening something important for you, take a moment now to support the channel. Give this video a like and subscribe. This helps this work reach people who are silently carrying family burdens without knowing there is another way. Another essential insight is that healing does not mean reconciling. Reconciliation is relational. Healing is systemic. You can be healed and still choose distance. Distance does not equal rejection when it comes from clarity instead of reaction. Clarity allows distance without bitterness. Bitterness is a sign that something remains unresolved internally. When healing happens, distance becomes neutral. Another misunderstanding is the belief that healing means becoming emotionally close. Sometimes, healing means becoming emotionally separate. Separate does not mean cold, it means differentiated. Differentiation restores adult functioning. Undifferentiated adults remain children in the system. Healing allows you to be an adult in your own life. Another reason presence is not required is that the system is always whole. Even if people are missing physically, their place remains. You cannot erase a place. You can only acknowledge or ignore it. Acknowledgement heals. Ignoring perpetuates.
Healing your family system means acknowledging the whole, including what you wish were not there. This does not require witnesses. It requires honesty. Another key point is that healing is not an event. It is a shift in orientation. You stop orienting toward what you lacked. You orient toward what was given, even if it was limited. Life was given. That is enough to begin. When you take life as it came, you stop demanding compensation. Demand creates tension. Acceptance releases it. Another subtle but powerful shift is when you stop trying to be different from your family in a reactive way. Being different out of rejection keeps you bound. Being different out of clarity frees you. Healing allows difference without opposition. Opposition maintains connection. Clarity allows separation. Another reason healing can happen alone is that much of what binds you is pre-verbal. It cannot be resolved through conversation.
It is resolved through inner movements, movements of respect, movements of acknowledgement, movements of positioning. These movements are quiet. They don't announce themselves, but the system responds immediately. Another important aspect is that healing does not mean you stop feeling. It means feelings stop governing your life. Emotions become information instead of commands. This happens when they are no longer carrying systemic weight. Weight is released when responsibility is returned to where it belongs. This return does not require delivery. It requires consent. Consent to not carry what is not yours. Another misconception is that healing requires courage to confront. Often, healing requires courage to stop confronting, to stop fighting ghosts, to stop rehearsing conversations that will never happen, to stop expecting closure from people who cannot give it. This courage is quieter, but more transformative. Healing your family system is not about making peace with everyone. It is about making peace with your place. When you stand in your place, the system settles around you. This settling creates space. Space for your own life. Space for your own relationships. Space for your own destiny. In the next part, we will go deeper into the inner movements that allow this healing to happen without contact, without confrontation, and without reopening wounds, only with clarity and respect. Healing a family system without the physical presence of your family requires something most people were never taught: the ability to relate inwardly in a mature way. This maturity is not emotional coldness, it is not detachment, it is not denial. It is the capacity to see clearly where you end and where the system begins. Many people believe they are dealing with their own emotions, when in fact they are carrying systemic emotions that do not belong to them personally. In family constellations, Bert Hellinger observed that children often take on emotions, burdens, or destinies unconsciously in an attempt to help the system. This happens out of love. A child senses imbalance and tries to compensate. If a parent is sad, the child becomes strong. If a parent is weak, the child becomes responsible. If a parent is absent, the child becomes loyal through longing. These adaptations feel like personality traits, but they are systemic roles. When these roles are not seen, the child grows into an adult who continues to live from them. This is why healing cannot rely on external change alone. The system has already organized itself inside you. One of the most important distinctions Hellinger made is between bonding love and mature love. Bonding love is blind. It says, "I will carry this for you. I will suffer so you don't have to. I will fail so I stay close." Mature love is sober. It says, "I respect your fate. I leave what belongs to you with you. I take my own life fully." Healing begins when love matures. This maturation does not require discussion. It requires inner separation. Inner separation is often misunderstood as emotional rejection. In reality, it is the opposite. It is respect. Respect means recognizing that your parents' lives, choices, and limitations are theirs, even when they harmed you, even when they failed you. This does not excuse them. It simply stops you from being entangled. Entanglement is the true source of suffering. Not what happened, but how the system responded to it. Hellinger saw that people remain stuck not because of trauma itself, but because of loyalty to trauma. This loyalty is unconscious. It often sounds like, "If I heal, I betray. If I move forward, I leave them behind. If I succeed, I become different." These thoughts are rarely conscious. They live in the body. They show up as guilt, fear, or sabotage. Healing without family presence requires addressing this loyalty. And loyalty dissolves when it is seen. One powerful insight is that children do not belong above their parents. When a child emotionally takes care of a parent, the order is reversed. This reversal creates long-term instability. Even if the parent is weak, even if the parent was wrong, order is not based on merit. It is based on sequence. Those who came before are above. Those who came later are below. When this order is restored internally, relief follows. Many adults resist this idea because they confuse hierarchy with worth.
They believe standing below means being smaller or inferior. In systemic terms, standing below means receiving life. Receiving does not diminish you. It strengthens you. You cannot stand fully in your adult life if you are still standing above your parents emotionally. Healing requires stepping down.
Not down in dignity, down in position. This is an internal movement. No one else needs to know. Another key concept is taking life. Hellinger emphasized that life comes through the parents exactly as they are, not as we wish they were. When we reject aspects of our parents, we partially reject life itself. This rejection shows up as resistance to living fully, fatigue, indecision, self-sabotage. Taking life does not mean approving of behavior. It means accepting the source. You can say internally, "You are my parents. Through you, life came to me. I take it now." This sentence alone can create profound shifts. It does not require presence. It requires sincerity. Another reason healing does not need contact is that the deepest wounds occurred before language. They are stored somatically. Talking often bypasses them. Inner movements reach them directly. For example, when someone carries fear that belongs to a grandparent who survived loss or violence, no conversation with living family members will resolve it. But acknowledgement can. Internally recognizing, "This fear belongs to you. I honor it. I leave it with you." This is not imagination. It is systemic recognition. The system responds. Another crucial aspect is that healing does not mean forgetting. It means remembering differently. Remembering with order instead of accusation. When memory is held with accusation, it binds. When memory is held with acknowledgement, it releases. Another common block is the belief that healing requires justice. Justice belongs to society. Healing belongs to the soul. When people wait for fairness before healing, they remain bound. Healing is not a reward for others' behavior. It is a decision to stand in your own life. Another important observation from Hellinger is that symptoms often serve loyalty. Depression can be loyalty to someone who was not allowed to grieve. Anxiety can be loyalty to someone who lived in constant danger. Failure can be loyalty to someone who lost everything. When you try to eliminate symptoms without understanding their function, they resist. When you recognize their loyalty, they soften. This recognition can happen alone, in silence. Another key principle is belonging. Everyone who belongs to the system has a place, including those who were rejected, shamed, aborted, excluded, or forgotten. When someone is excluded, another often represents them unconsciously. This representation does not stop because family members are absent. It continues until inclusion happens. Inclusion does not require reunion. It requires acknowledgement. Saying internally, "You belong. I see you." This simple recognition restores balance. Another misconception is that healing means confronting perpetrators. In systemic work, perpetrators also belong, not to excuse them, but to acknowledge reality. Excluding perpetrators keeps the system split. Acknowledging them restores wholeness. This acknowledgement can be entirely internal. You do not need to speak to anyone. Another essential element is humility. Humility means accepting that you cannot fully understand what shaped your parents. You can know facts, but not the full weight. Humility softens judgment. Judgment keeps you emotionally above. Humility allows you to step into your place. Healing without presence also requires patience. Systems shift slowly, not emotionally, Structurally, you may notice subtle changes first: more ease, less urgency, clearer boundaries, then larger shifts follow. Another important distinction is between forgiveness and release. Forgiveness often implies superiority. Release implies separation. Release says, "I leave what is yours with you." This is cleaner than forgiveness. It does not require moral evaluation. It restores order. Another reason healing can happen alone is that the system does not require witnesses. It responds to truth. Truth spoken internally is still truth. Hellinger often worked silently. Words were minimal. Movements mattered more. This shows that healing is not performative. It is structural. Another subtle block is identification. People identify with family members unconsciously. I am like my mother. I carry my father's pain. These identifications feel loving, but limit individuality. Healing requires differentiation. Differentiation says, "You are you, I am me." This separation honors both. Another aspect is destiny. Some family patterns repeat because someone's fate was not acknowledged. Later generations unconsciously repeat it to give it meaning. Healing acknowledges fate without repeating it. You can say internally, "I honor your fate. I do not repeat it." This acknowledgement frees you. Another misunderstanding is that healing requires strength. Often, it requires surrender. Surrender to what cannot be changed. Surrender ends resistance. Resistance drains life force. Acceptance restores it. Another reason presence is not needed is that healing is not relational negotiation. It is systemic realignment. Realignment happens inside. Outside often follows or becomes irrelevant. When your position changes, relationships change naturally, or you relate differently to their absence. Another important point is that healing is not about cutting ties. Cutting ties is still a relationship. Healing allows connection without entanglement. Connection without demand. This connection can exist even when there is no contact. Another aspect is grief. Many people have unresolved grief toward their parents, grief for what they never received. Healing requires allowing this grief internally, not demanding repayment. Grief acknowledged dissolves entitlement. Entitlement keeps you bound. Another subtle shift is moving from "they owe me" to "I take responsibility for my life now." This shift marks adulthood. Healing is adulthood. Another reason healing does not require presence is that your nervous system responds to inner safety. When order is restored, the nervous system calms. Calm allows choice. Choice allows freedom. Freedom allows love without sacrifice. This is the essence of systemic healing. In the next part, we will explore specific inner sentences and movements that help release entanglements, restore order, and allow you to heal deeply, even when your family remains physically or emotionally absent. You do not heal your family system by fixing relationships. You heal it by changing your inner position. This distinction is subtle, but everything depends on it. Most suffering continues because people stay oriented toward the outside. They wait for recognition. They wait for apology. They wait for warmth, accountability, repair. But systems do not heal through waiting. They heal through order. Order is not negotiated. It is recognized. One of the deepest misunderstandings about healing without family presence is the belief that absence blocks resolution. In systemic reality, absence often makes resolution clearer. When others are no longer present, the illusion that something external will save you dissolves.
What remains is your relationship with life itself, and that relationship lives entirely inside you. Bert Hellinger observed that the most decisive healing movements often happen when a person stops orienting toward their parents as people and starts orienting toward them as origins. Origin is not emotional, it is existential. Your parents are the place where life entered the system and moved toward you. Nothing more is required for order. When you keep seeking emotional completion from them, you remain a child in the system. When you recognize them as the source and turn toward your own life, you step into adulthood. Adulthood is not independence, it is alignment. Another key principle is that unresolved bonds do not live in memory, they live in expectation. Expectation keeps you facing backward. Even anger is often an expectation in disguise. Anger says, you should have been different. When expectation dissolves, anger loses its fuel.
This does not mean anger was wrong. It means it completed its function. Completion does not require expression, it requires recognition. One of the most stabilizing inner movements is acknowledging the price your parents paid in their own lives. Not to justify harm, to restore proportion. When children see only what they lacked, the system remains unbalanced. When they also see what was endured, perspective returns. Perspective does not erase pain, it contextualizes it. Context allows separation. Separation allows peace. Another essential movement is returning what does not belong to you. Many people live with emotional burdens that were transferred silently. Fear that does not match their biography. Sadness without a clear cause. Guilt without a personal action. These burdens often originated in previous generations. Carrying them feels like loyalty. Releasing them feels like betrayal. But true loyalty respects boundaries.
You can say internally, "This belongs to you. I carried it out of love. I leave it with you now." This sentence is not symbolic, it is structural. The system responds to clarity. Another common entanglement is identification with suffering. When suffering becomes identity, healing feels like disappearance. People fear that without pain, they will not know who they are. This fear keeps pain alive. Healing requires allowing identity to soften. You are not your wound. You are not your role. You are life moving forward. Another important aspect is the illusion of responsibility. Many children believe they were responsible for their parents' emotional states. If I had been better, they would have been happier. This belief gives a child a sense of control. But it is false. Releasing this illusion is painful because it exposes helplessness. Helplessness is not weakness, it is reality. Accepting helplessness restores order.
Parents are responsible for their lives. Children are responsible for theirs. When this line becomes clear, relief follows. Another crucial insight is that love does not require agreement. You can love without approving. You can respect without reconciling. Systemic love is not relational intimacy. It is acknowledgement. Acknowledgement is quiet. It does not argue. It does not convince. It simply sees. Seeing is enough. Another block arises from idealized images of healing. People imagine healing as lightness, joy, emotional release. Often, real healing feels neutral at first. Less charge, less urgency, less inner noise. This neutrality can feel disappointing. But neutrality is stability. Stability allows life to unfold without distortion. Another important movement is facing the consequences of alignment. When you stop carrying others, you may feel alone. Not because you are abandoned, but because you are no longer merged.
This aloneness is healthy. It is the ground of individuality. From this ground, relationships become choice instead of obligation. Another essential aspect is recognizing when contact is a substitute for alignment. Some people maintain contact to avoid inner work. Others avoid contact to avoid inner work. Both are strategies. Healing does not depend on either. It depends on truth. Truth does not negotiate with comfort. Another deep layer is grief for the parents you did not have. Not the parents you lost, the parents you needed. This grief is often delayed for decades. People stay angry instead of grieving because grief feels like giving up hope. But hope for what never was keeps you bound. Grief releases you. Grief does not weaken you. It grounds you. When grief is allowed, entitlement dissolves. Without entitlement, freedom emerges.
Another systemic insight is that healing often requires turning away from parents toward life. This turning away is misunderstood as rejection. It is orientation. You do not turn away from them in your heart. You turn toward what came through them, life. When life becomes your reference point, parental absence loses its centrality. Another subtle loyalty is repeating relational patterns, choosing unavailable partners, remaining unseen, overgiving. These patterns are attempts to resolve old dynamics. Healing recognizes that repetition is not resolution. Recognition ends repetition. Another aspect is silence. Not avoidance silence, completion silence. When inner dialogue with parents ends, silence appears. This silence is not empty. It is settled. From this silence, you act without inner commentary. This is maturity. Another essential movement is relinquishing moral superiority. Moral superiority keeps you above.
Above blocks receiving. Receiving life requires humility. Humility does not mean submission. It means realism. Realism accepts limits. Another important distinction is between honoring parents and centering them. Honoring acknowledges their place. Centering sacrifices your life to theirs. Healing removes parents from the center of your adult life without removing them from your heart. This is balance. Another deep insight is that systems resist change until someone stops compensating. When you stop compensating, discomfort arises. Others may react. This reaction is not a sign of wrongdoing. It is a sign that balance is returning. Balance often feels unstable at first, but instability precedes order. Another key element is time. Systemic time is not linear. Shifts can feel immediate internally and take months externally. Do not rush integration. Rushing is another form of control. Control keeps you bound. Trust allows unfolding. Another important realization is that healing does not require understanding everything. Understanding often comes after alignment. Trying to understand before aligning delays healing. Alignment first, weaning later. Another subtle movement is releasing the need to be seen by parents. When that need dissolves, visibility becomes internal. You no longer depend on external acknowledgement to feel real. This internal visibility is grounding. Another deep shift happens when you stop explaining your parents to yourself. Explanation keeps them central. Acknowledgement releases explanation. You can simply know, this is how it was, and move on. Another important aspect is compassion without fusion. Compassion sees suffering, fusion carries it. Healing chooses compassion with boundaries. Boundaries protect love. Another layer is destiny. Some family dynamics exist because something larger was at work. War, migration, loss, poverty. Personalizing systemic suffering creates resentment. Seeing the larger forces restores humility. Humility restores peace. Another crucial insight is that you do not heal from your family. You heal through your place in it. Place is everything. When your place is clear, movement becomes possible. And finally, healing without family presence teaches one fundamental truth. Nothing essential is missing. What you needed to heal was never outside. It was a shift of position inside. And when that position settles, something very quiet happens. Life stops waiting. It begins moving. If something in this part touched you, unsettled you, or clarified something you have carried for a long time, leave a comment and share what stayed with you. Your words help complete the movement.
When the inner position changes, daily life begins to respond in small but unmistakable ways. Not dramatically, not symbolically, practically. You notice that situations which once drained you now feel neutral. You notice that certain emotional hooks simply don't catch anymore. You notice that your body reacts differently before your mind understands why. This is how systemic change shows itself, not as insight, but as regulation. Bert Hellinger emphasized that the body often aligns before the narrative does. The system reorganizes first, meaning comes later. Many people make the mistake of doubting their healing because their story hasn't changed yet. But healing does not rewrite the past. It changes how the past lives in the present. Another important shift is how you relate to authority. Parents are the first authority figures in the system. When the relationship with them is unresolved, authority everywhere becomes distorted.
Some people rebel against authority compulsively. Others submit, even when it costs them dignity. Both positions originate in the family system. When order is restored internally, authority becomes contextual instead of emotional. You can respect authority without shrinking. You can disagree without fear. You can lead without guilt. This neutrality is a sign of alignment. Another subtle change appears in decision-making. People who carry family burdens often overthink simple choices. They scan for danger. They anticipate consequences excessively. They feel responsible for outcomes beyond their control. When systemic entanglements loosen, decisions become simpler. Not easier, clearer. You choose based on reality, not on invisible loyalties. Another deep shift happens in how you experience fatigue. Chronic fatigue is often systemic. Not physical exhaustion, but emotional overextension.
When you stop carrying what is not yours, energy returns. not as motivation, as availability. You don't need to push yourself as hard to function. Life requires less force. Another important movement is the end of comparison with siblings. Sibling dynamics are deeply affected by systemic order. When one child carries more than their share, resentment grows. When order is restored, comparison dissolves. You recognize that each sibling has a different relationship with the system. You stop measuring fairness. Fairness is a mental construct. Order is structural. Another significant shift is how you experience intimacy. People who are entangled with their parents often struggle with closeness. They either merge too quickly or keep emotional distance. When parental bonds are clarified internally, intimacy becomes safer. You no longer confuse closeness with obligation. You can stay connected without losing yourself.
This creates stability in relationships. Another layer is the release of unconscious contracts. Many people live by internal contracts such as, I will never be happier than my mother. I will not surpass my father. I will stay small so others don't feel abandoned. These contracts are rarely conscious, but they govern choices. When you see them, they lose power. Seeing is enough. Another important shift is how you handle conflict. Conflict no longer feels like threat to belonging. You don't panic when disagreement arises. You don't collapse or attack. You stay present. Presence diffuses escalation. This presence comes from knowing that your place in the system is secure. Another subtle change is how memory surfaces. Old memories may appear without emotional charge. You remember, but you are not pulled back. This neutrality indicates integration. Integration means memory is stored, not lived. Another deep transformation happens in how you perceive your parents' absence. Absence loses its emotional centrality. It becomes a fact, not a wound. You stop orienting your life around what is missing. You orient toward what is possible. Another important aspect is the release of inherited fear. Fear that belonged to previous generations often manifests as hypervigilance. When fear is returned to its origin, your nervous system recalibrates. Calm becomes available. Calm allows spontaneity. Spontaneity brings life back into the present. Another shift appears in ambition. Ambition driven by compensation softens. You no longer need to prove worth through achievement. Achievement becomes expression, not survival. This changes your relationship with success and failure. Neither defines you. Another important change is how you relate to time. People entangled with family systems often feel behind or rushed.
They live with an invisible deadline. When alignment occurs, time feels more spacious. You act when ready. You wait when needed. There is less urgency. Urgency was never yours. Another subtle but profound change is how you listen. You stop listening to respond or defend. You listen to understand. Understanding does not mean agreement. It means presence. Presence deepens connection without sacrifice. Another transformation happens in how you hold responsibility. You stop taking responsibility for emotions that are not yours. This clarity prevents burnout. It also invites others into their own responsibility. Another important insight is that healing does not erase longing. It changes its direction. Longing turns away from the past and toward life. Longing becomes aspiration instead of grief. Another deep movement is the reconciliation with limits. You accept that some parents will never change. Acceptance here is not resignation, it is realism. Realism frees you from hope that binds. Another layer is the release of internalized criticism. The inner critic often carries parental voices. When you separate from these voices, self-talk softens. You become more supportive internally. This internal environment supports growth. Another key shift is the emergence of self-trust. Not confidence, trust. Trust that you can meet what arises. This trust grows from alignment, not from reassurance. Another important aspect is dignity. Dignity returns when you stop explaining your pain to those who cannot hold it. You protect your inner world. Protection is not isolation, it is discernment. Another transformation is the capacity to hold paradox. You can love your parents and acknowledge harm. You can feel gratitude and grief simultaneously. Paradox no longer creates confusion, it creates depth.
Another subtle sign of healing is reduced reactivity to family stories. When others speak about your parents, you don't tense. The charge is gone. Another shift is the end of repetitive internal dialogues. You stop rehearsing conversations that will never happen. This frees mental space. Another important movement is grounding in the present body. You feel your feet more. Your breath deepens. The body signals safety. Safety allows creativity. Another layer is the release of shame. Shame often originates from systemic dynamics. When order returns, shame dissolves naturally. No affirmation needed. Another change is how you relate to silence. Silence becomes restorative. You don't fill it, you inhabit it. Another insight is that healing does not require perfection. Missteps do not invalidate alignment. You adjust and continue. Another transformation is the recognition of choice.
You realize that many reactions were inherited, not chosen. Now you choose. Choice is freedom. Another subtle but essential shift is gratitude without obligation. You feel thankful without needing to repay. This gratitude is quiet. It rests. And finally, a deep calm begins to stabilize. Not excitement, calm. Calm is the sign that the system has settled. From this calm, life can finally be lived forward. Not in reaction, not in repair, but in presence. When calm begins to stabilize, something unexpected often surfaces. Not relief, not joy. Responsibility. Not the heavy responsibility of childhood, but the quiet responsibility of adulthood. This responsibility is no longer about fixing what came before. It is about choosing what comes next. Many people unconsciously avoid this stage, because as long as the past remains unresolved, the future can be postponed. Healing removes that excuse.
Once the system settles, life asks a simple question. What will you do with what you received? This question can feel confronting, because taking life fully also means taking authorship. There is no one left to blame, no one left to wait for. This is not abandonment. It is freedom.
Bert Hellinger observed that many people remain entangled not because they cannot heal, but because healing would require them to live more boldly than their parents did. This creates unconscious guilt. If I live fully, I leave them behind. But in systemic truth, parents want their children to live, even when they could not express it, even when they acted against it. Life moves forward through children. Stopping yourself does not honor your parents. Living does. Another deep realization at this stage is that suffering is not a prerequisite for belonging. Many people learned early that pain was the currency of connection. If I suffer, I stay loyal.
If I struggle, I remain close. When this belief dissolves, joy becomes permissible. Permissible joy is different from chaste happiness. It is quiet. It does not need justification. Another important shift is how you relate to effort. You stop forcing outcomes. Not because you stop caring, but because you trust movement. Effort becomes aligned instead of compensatory. You act where action belongs. You rest where rest is needed. This balance was impossible before because you were acting for more than one. Now you act for yourself. Another subtle transformation happens in how you experience loneliness. Loneliness no longer feels like lack. It feels like space. Space to sense yourself. Space to hear your own rhythm. This space is often the birthplace of creativity. Creativity emerges when survival is no longer the primary task. Another layer is the end of inherited urgency.
Urgency is often passed down through generations who lived under threat. When urgency dissolves, patience emerges. Patience is not waiting, it is trust in timing. Another important shift is how you hold boundaries. Boundaries no longer feel aggressive or defensive. They feel natural. You don't explain them excessively. You don't justify them emotionally. You simply honor your limits. Limits protect life force. Another deep change is the release of internal conflict between loyalty and desire. Desire no longer feels dangerous. You allow yourself to want what you want, not impulsively, honestly. Honest desire aligns with life. Another subtle sign of healing is how your body occupies space. You stand differently. You sit differently. Your movements are less guarded. The body no longer expects interruption. Another transformation happens in how you relate to money, work, and stability.
For many, financial struggle is linked to family entanglements. Poverty, loss, exile, or injustice in previous generations often shape unconscious limits. When these are acknowledged, capacity expands. You allow yourself to receive more. Receiving more does not betray those who had less. It continues life. Another key movement is the release of comparison with parents' paths. You stop measuring whether your life is harder or easier. You recognize difference instead of hierarchy. Difference allows peace. Another important insight is that maturity includes disappointment. Not disappointment in others, disappointment in illusions. Illusions about fairness. Illusions about repair. Illusions about completion. When illusions fall, reality becomes workable. Another deep shift is how you relate to strength. Strength no longer means endurance at all costs. It means responsiveness, knowing when to stop, knowing when to speak,
knowing when to leave. This responsiveness is intelligence. Another subtle transformation is the end of self-betrayal disguised as kindness. You stop sacrificing yourself to maintain harmony. Harmony built on self-erasure was never harmony. True harmony includes you. Another important aspect is the emergence of inner permission. Permission to rest, permission to succeed, permission to enjoy. This permission was blocked when you were unconsciously loyal to struggle. Now it flows naturally. Another layer is the release of fear around surpassing parents. You realize that surpassing is not competition, it is continuation. Life wants expansion. Another key insight is that healing does not make you immune to pain. It changes your relationship with it. Pain no longer threatens identity. It becomes an experience, not a definition. Another subtle but profound shift is the return of curiosity. Curiosity signals safety.
You explore without needing control. Exploration brings vitality. Another important transformation is how you experience gratitude. Gratitude no longer feels like obligation, it feels like recognition. Recognition of what was given. Recognition of what is possible. Another movement is the end of internal rehearsals for justification. You don't need to explain your choices internally, you trust them. Trust reduces inner noise. Another deep shift is integration of masculine and feminine energies. Not in gender terms, in movement. You balance action and receptivity, initiative and surrender. This balance stabilizes life. Another aspect is the release of inherited shame around visibility. You allow yourself to be seen, not performatively, authentically. Visibility no longer feels dangerous. Another important change is how you relate to mistakes. Mistakes no longer trigger collapse. You correct and continue. Continuity is resilience. Another subtle sign of healing is reduced need for external validation. You value feedback, but you don't depend on it. Internal alignment becomes reference. Another key realization is that peace is not passive. Peace allows decisive action. Decisiveness without aggression. Another transformation is how you experience mornings. You wake up less burdened, not because life is easy, but because you are present. Presence lightens existence. Another layer is the acceptance of ordinariness. You don't need extraordinary meaning. Ordinary life becomes enough. Enoughness is deeply healing. And slowly, almost without noticing, your life stops being a response to your family system. It becomes an expression of you, not separate from your origins, but no longer bound by them. This is the quiet power of systemic healing. Not dramatic, not loud, but real. And it prepares the ground for the final settling, where acceptance becomes stable and peace no longer needs to be protected. There's a moment when nothing more needs to be adjusted. Not because everything is perfect, but because the system has found its resting point. This resting point does not announce itself with emotion. It arrives as steadiness. You stop scanning yourself for signs of progress. You stop measuring whether you are healed enough. The need to check disappears. This is one of the clearest signs that alignment has settled. When healing is incomplete, the mind stays vigilant. It watches, it evaluates, it anticipates collapse. When healing completes a cycle, vigilance relaxes. Not into carelessness, into trust. Trust that you can meet life as it unfolds without needing to preempt it. Another deep sign of completion is the end of inner negotiation.
You no longer bargain with the past.
If this hadn't happened, then... if they had been different, I would... These sentences fall silent. Not because answers were found, but because the questions lost relevance. Relevance belongs to the present. Another profound shift happens in how you relate to destiny. Destiny is no longer something to fight or fix. It becomes something to stand beside. Bert Hellinger spoke often about bowing inwardly to what is, not as submission, but as acknowledgement. Acknowledgement restores dignity. When dignity returns, resentment dissolves. Another sign of completion is how you experience compassion. Compassion no longer pulls you into others' suffering. It allows closeness without absorption. You can witness pain without carrying it. This is mature compassion. Another subtle shift is how your nervous system handles uncertainty. Uncertainty no longer triggers collapse or control. It invites attention. Attention replaces fear.
Another deep change appears in how you experience silence. Silence is no longer something to escape. It becomes nourishing. You don't rush to fill it with thought or stimulation. You rest in it. This rest integrates everything that came before. Another marker of completion is how you relate to your parents internally. They no longer occupy the center. They are present, but in their place. You don't push them away. You don't pull them closer. They simply are. And you are. Life flows between these positions without obstruction. Another important sign is the end of self-punishment. You no longer withhold ease from yourself. You no longer believe suffering is required to stay loyal. Loyalty through pain dissolves. Loyalty through life takes its place. Another shift happens in how you hold memory. Memories arise without emotional flooding. They pass without demand. This indicates integration.
Another deep movement is the acceptance of limits. You stop demanding that life compensate you. You stop waiting for balance to be restored externally. Balance is internal. Another subtle sign is the return of gentleness toward yourself. Not indulgence, gentleness. You correct without cruelty. You notice without judgment. This gentleness stabilizes growth. Another transformation happens in how you relate to time. You are less preoccupied with whether things are happening fast enough. You trust your pace. Pace is personal. Another important shift is how you experience belonging. Belonging no longer depends on performance or suffering. You belong because you exist. This is foundational. Another layer of completion is the end of identity built around healing. You no longer define yourself as the one who worked on themselves. You simply live. Healing becomes background. Life becomes foreground.
Another sign is how joy shows up. Joy no longer feels fragile.
You don't brace for its loss. You allow it to come and go. Allowance is freedom. Another deep shift is how you respond to old triggers. They may still appear, but they no longer hijack you. You feel them. You stay present. Presence neutralizes repetition. Another important movement is reconciliation with ordinariness. You don't need extraordinary experiences to feel alive. Ordinary moments carry weight without heaviness. Another subtle completion is the end of explanation. You don't need to explain your life to justify it. You live it. Living becomes enough. Another transformation is how you experience gratitude. Gratitude no longer looks backward. It rests in the present. This is my life. This sentence becomes possible. Another sign of completion is the willingness to receive support without shame.
You don't confuse receiving with weakness. Receiving is part of order. Another deep settling happens around identity. You are no longer defined by where you came from. Your origins are honored, not reenacted. Another subtle shift is the end of fear around loss of control. You accept that control was never real. Acceptance brings relief. Another important insight is that peace is not the absence of difficulty. It is the absence of inner opposition to difficulty. This opposition consumed most of your energy before. Now it rests. And finally, something very human emerges. A simple willingness to be here. Not to fix, not to compensate, not to prove. To live. This willingness is quiet. It shows up in daily choices, in rest, in clarity, in honest limits. This is the completion of the movement. Nothing dramatic remains. Only life, moving forward, without resistance.
If this final part resonated with you, leave a comment sharing what settled, what shifted, or what you are still noticing inside. Your words help close this journey with awareness.